aid. Up to his arrival I was not aware of any pecuniary aid. I came unsalaried, but this want is now happily repaired, and I am anxious that you and all my friends should know that, though uncheered by letter, I have stuck to the task which my friend Sir Roderick Murchison sent me with John Bullish tenacity, believing that all would come right at last. The watershed of South Central Africa is over 700 miles in length. The fountains thereon are almost innumerable; that is, it would take a man's lifetime to count them. From the watershed they converge into 4 large rivers, and these again into 2 mighty streams in the great Nile Valley, which begins in 10° to 12° south latitude. It was ere long light dawned on the most ancient problem and gave me a clear idea of the drainage. I had to feel my way, and every step of the way, and was, generally, groping in the dark. But who cared where the rivers ran? We drank our fill and let the rest run by. The Portuguese who visited Cazembe asked for slaves and ivory, and heard of nothing else. I asked about the waters, questioned and cross-questioned, until I was almost afraid of being set down as afflicted with hydrocephalus. My last work, in which I have been greatly hindered from want of suitable attendants, was following the central line of drainage down through the country of the cannibals, called Manyuema, or shortly Manyema. This line of drainage has 4 large lakes in it. The 4th I was near when obliged to turn. It is from 1 to 3 miles broad, and never can be reached at any point, or at any time of the year. 2 western drains, the Lufira or Bartle Frere's River, flow into it at Lake Comolando. Then the great river Lomam flows through the Lake Lincoln into it too, and seems to form the western arm of the Nile, on which Petherick traded. Now I knew about 600 miles of the watershed, and unfortunately the 700th is the most interesting of the whole, for in it, if I am not mistaken, 4 fountains arise from an earthen mound, and the last of the 4 becomes, at no great distance off, a large river. 2 of these run north to Egypt, Lufira and Lomam, and 2 run south into inner Ethiopia, as the Leambai or Upper Zambezi and the Kofel. Are not these sources of the Nile mentioned by the Secretary of Minerva in the city of Sais to Herodotus? I have heard of them so often, and at great distances off, that I cannot doubt their existence, and in spite of the sore longing for home that seizes me every time I think of my family, I wish to finish up by their rediscovery. 500 pounds sterling worth of goods have been unaccountably entrusted to slaves, and I have been over a year on the way, instead of 4 months. I must go where they lie at your expense, ere I can put the natural completion to my work. And if my disclosures regarding the terrible Ujiji slavery should lead to the suppression of the East Coast slave trade, I shall regard that as a greater matter by far than the discovery of all the Nile sources together. Now that you have done with domestic slavery forever, lend us your powerful aid toward this great object. This fine country is blighted, as with a curse from above, in order that the slavery privileges of the petty Sultan of Zanzibar may not be infringed, and the rights of the Crown of Portugal, which are mythical, should be kept in abeyance till some future time, when Africa will become another India to Portuguese slave traders. I conclude by again thanking you most cordially for your great generosity, and am gratefully yours, David Livingstone. To the above letter I have nothing to add. It speaks for itself. But then I thought it was the best evidence of my success. For my own part, I cared not 1 jot or tittle about his discoveries, except so far as it concerned the newspaper which commissioned me for the search. It is true I felt curious as to the result of his travels, but since he confessed that he had not completed what he had begun, I felt considerable delicacy to ask for more than he could afford to give. His discoveries were the fruits of his own labours. To him they belonged. By their publication he hoped to obtain his reward, which he desired to settle on his children. Yet Livingstone had a higher and nobler ambition than the mere pecuniary sum he would receive. He followed the dictates of duty. Never was such a willing slave to that abstract virtue. His inclinations impelled him home, the fascinations of which it required the sternest resolves to resist. With every foot of new ground he travelled over he forged a chain of sympathy which should hereafter bind the Christian nations in bonds of love and charity to the heathen of the African tropics. If he were able to complete this chain of love, by actual discovery and description of them to embody such peoples and nations as still live in darkness, so as to attract the good and charitable of his own land to bestir themselves for the redemption and salvation, this Livingstone would consider an ample reward. A delirious and fatuous enterprise, a quixotic scheme, some will say. Not it, my friends, for as sure as the sun shines on both Christian and infidel, civilized and pagan, the day of enlightenment will come, and though Livingstone, the apostle of Africa, may not behold it himself, nor we younger men, nor yet our children, the hereafter will see it, and posterity will recognize the daring pioneer of its civilization. End of chapter 15, part 1.